Everyone loves to imagine medieval cheating as something small, a stolen look in a doorway, a hand that lingers too long, secret swallowed before it becomes a sentence. But the Middle Ages were not built for secrets, not the kind that live in the body, because in a medieval town, an affair was not just a sin, it was a threat. Crack in the wall that held families, property, names, inheritance, and the fragile illusion of order. And if that crack became visible, if it began to grow beneath cloth and prayer, the whole town could feel invited to step closer. This is the part people forget. You didn't need to be caught in bed. You only needed time. A month that didn't make sense. A husband who returned too late. A belly that arrived too early. A woman who grew quieter, heavier, careful, and suddenly became interesting to people who were starving for a story. And once a town becomes interested, it never watches politely. It watches like a judge. It watches like a crowd. Watches like something hungry. Tonight is not the story of one woman. It's the story of how medieval women and the men around them navigated cheating, suspicion, and the most dangerous kind of proof. The kind you can't burn, deny, or bury fast enough. We'll move through kitchens and confessionals, through gossip circles that sound like prayer, through marriages that are less love than contract. We'll meet the quiet brokers of secrecy, the servant who sees too much, the midwife who knows too much, the priest who hears too much, and the men who discover that humiliation is more painful than betrayal. Because in that world, the worst crime was not desire. The worst crime was making the lie visible. If you enjoy immersive historical stories that show the past the way it really felt, tense, human and cruel in small ways, consider liking the video and subscribing. Now, step back with me into a town of narrow streets and thin walls, where everyone can hear your footsteps. Everyone can count the months, and a single rumor can ruin you long before any court ever does. In a medieval town, the wedding day does not smell like romance. It smells like wax and wool, damp stone and warm bread. A ribbon is tied. A vow is spoken. A ring flashes once in the light, then disappears under sleeves and daily work. People clap, drink, laugh. But the loudest sound is the quiet one, the scratching of ink on parchment, because the real marriage happens there. A clerk leans over a table, copying names that will matter long after the wine is gone. A father watches the pen like a hawk. Somewhere in the back, a mother counts what her daughter is worth, not in beauty, but in alliances, dowries, and the promise of heirs. This is the first thing to understand. In much of medieval Europe, marriage is less a private choice than a public device. It binds families, it moves land, it settles feuds. Love may exist inside it sometimes, but love is not the reason the town cares. The town cares because marriage makes ownership clean. A husband gains rights over a household, over labor, over children that will carry his name. A wife gains protection on paper, a place in a structure that is merciful only when it is profitable. Parents gain a future. Lords gain stability. Priests gain control over a ritual that turns desire into something regulated. And then there is the obsession that hangs over everything like smoke, legitimacy. A baby arrives as proof. Proof that the marriage worked. Proof that the bloodline continues. Proof that property will not be disputed by the wrong branch of a family tree. A child is a lock on a chest, and everyone wants the key to fit. Now imagine what cheating means inside that system. It's not just betrayal between two people. It is sabotage. If a married woman sleeps with someone else, the fear is not only scandal. The fear is that she might give birth to a child who does not belong to the husband, yet will take the husband's name, inherit the husband's land, and become a mistake that future generations can't undo. That possibility is enough to turn intimacy into politics. It's why communities watch women's bodies with an intensity that feels almost supernatural. It's why husbands measure time like accountants. It's why families dread shame, because shame is not a feeling here. It is a weapon that can dissolve marriages, destroy alliances, and leave people with nowhere to go. And it's why men's cheating, while condemned in sermons, is often treated differently in practice. A man can stray and still produce legitimate heirs at home. A woman's betrayal threatens the mechanism itself. So the system punishes her more harshly not because her sin is greater, but because her body can carry the evidence. And once fear enters a house, everything becomes arithmetic. Nights, absences, whispers, and the slow, merciless math of months. This is the cruelty hidden inside the calm language of contracts. The woman becomes the hinge of everyone else's future, and the town acts like it owns the door.
Ah,
So when we talk about medieval adultery, we're not starting with passion. We're starting with stakes. A marriage is a bargain. An heir is a guarantee. Just a rumor can make a family look at a woman the way you look at a cracked dam. Not with love, but with fear. In a medieval town, privacy is a myth told by people who have never lived with thin walls. Houses press against each other like shoulders in a crowd. Windows look directly into windows. You share water, ovens, streets, and, without realizing it, you share each other's lives. A woman cannot cough at night without someone hearing it. She cannot buy herbs at the market without someone noticing which ones. She cannot walk to church without being counted, step by eyes that pretend they aren't watching. The reason they watch is simple. They believe they have the right. Not in the modern sense of law written neatly in books, but in the older, heavier sense of community ownership. A town survives by knowing. It survives by controlling the unpredictable. And nothing feels more unpredictable than a woman who might embarrass a family, confuse an inheritance, or invite God's anger onto the street. So a woman's body becomes everyone's concern, especially after marriage. It begins gently, almost kindly. Older women comment on how you look. They touch your sleeve, your shoulder, your wrist. They call you pale. They call you tired. They ask if you are eating enough, sleeping enough, praying enough. They smile when they ask. That's how surveillance works best. It wears a friendly face. Then it becomes routine. A neighbor notices you stopped bleeding this month. Servant notices you vomit behind the shed. Midwife notices your posture changes. A mother-in-law notices you eat less at dinner or more. Someone notices you stopped lifting heavy baskets. Someone notices your dress is looser. Someone notices your hand drifting to your belly in a moment of unconscious protection. And once the first person notices, it spreads. Women talk to women. Men talk to men. Children repeat words they don't understand. A small town is not a collection of individuals. It is a single, nervous organism. It senses weakness. It senses scandal. It senses anything that could become a story. Now add the church. Confession is supposed to be private. But confession also creates knowledge, and knowledge creates power. A priest hears secrets that can break households. He hears names, dates, suspicions. Sometimes he uses this carefully. Sometimes he uses it like a knife. Either way, people know he might know, and that alone shapes behavior like a threat hovering in the air. And then there are the midwives. In a world without doctors for ordinary people, midwives are not just helpers. They are gatekeepers. They can confirm pregnancy. They can deny it. They can decide how much the town is allowed to know and when. They can protect a woman, or expose her, or more often keep her in a state of dependence, because the secret is never simply kept. It is managed. A woman who wants to hide something must rely on someone else's silence. A servant, a friend, a sister, a midwife. Each person who helps becomes a risk, and also a link in a chain that can tighten around her neck at any moment. That is the horror of it. Secrecy creates a network, and networks can be bought. A loaf of bread, a coin, a promise, a threat, a favor owed. The town doesn't need proof in the modern sense. It doesn't need to see an act. It only needs to feel that something is wrong. And in medieval life, wrong is often enough to justify punishment. The community believes it has to correct imbalance before God notices. So a woman lives inside a kind of constant audition. Her body is read like scripture, her movements interpreted like omens. And if she is suspected of cheating, even for a moment, she is no longer just a person. She is a problem that must be solved. And the most terrifying part is this. She often realizes she is being watched only after the watching has already become a verdict. In the Middle Ages, time is not measured with precision. Most people do not own clocks. Many cannot read calendars. Days are counted by bells, by market mornings, by saints' feasts, by the rhythm of harvest and hunger. Winter feels endless. Summer passes like a breath. The year is a circle, not a line. And yet this is the strange contradiction. When it comes to women, time becomes exact. It's not written down, not neatly recorded, but remembered. Because a town may forget the date of a treaty, But it will remember the date a husband left. It will remember the week he returned. It will remember who slept where during the plague, who traveled with the merchants, who was seen at the inn too late at night. It will remember these things the way a predator remembers a trail. It's not romantic. It's arithmetic. A husband goes away for work, for war, for trade, for pilgrimage. People know. They watch him pack. They watch him walk down the road. They wave, then they talk. They talk because distance is danger, and absence invites imagination. At first, suspicion is vague. A glance exchanged in church. A conversation that ends too abruptly. A woman who suddenly stops meeting eyes. Little things. Tiny cracks. But tiny cracks are all a medieval town needs, because medieval life is built on pressure. Then the months pass. The body begins to tell a story whether the woman wants it to or not. At first, it's barely anything. Fatigue that lingers, nausea that arrives in the morning like an unwanted visitor, a quietness that replaces laughter. She eats differently. She walks differently. She holds her stomach for a second too long, then catches herself. She tightens her belt one notch, then loosens it again. She chooses a thicker dress. The town starts counting. Not officially, not openly, but in the way people count when they're pretending they're not. One neighbor notices the cloth. Another notices the change in her face. Someone remembers the husband has been gone too long. Someone remembers he returned late. The timeline begins to form in the collective mind like a stain spreading through paper. A woman may think she is hiding inside her own home. She is also hiding inside other people's memories. And that is the trap. Once time becomes the accuser, you cannot argue with it. You cannot bribe it. You cannot persuade it to forget. You can only attempt to rewrite it. So people adjust stories. A woman becomes careful about what she says. When she says it, who hears it? A family suddenly insists the husband returned earlier than he did. A servant is told to repeat a version of events until she believes it. A priest is given a clean confession, vague enough to forgive, empty enough to protect. Sometimes it works for a while, because the medieval town, despite its hunger for scandal, also loves the comfort of a neat story. It wants the baby to be legitimate. It wants the line to continue. It wants to believe the contract held. But belief is fragile, and the belly keeps growing. That is what makes pregnancy so terrifying in a world obsessed with reputation. It is slow, and it is public. Cannot be hidden forever, only delayed. Every day a woman survives without exposure is also one day closer to the moment she cannot. And when that moment arrives, the question changes. At first, people ask, is she pregnant? Then they ask, whose is it? And then quietly, dangerously, they ask the question that turns suspicion into violence. Who will pay for this? Because in a medieval town, a scandal is not just discovered, it is used. A medieval woman who needed to hide a betrayal did not wake up thinking in romance. She woke up thinking in logistics. What can be seen? What can be repeated? What can be denied without sounding like denial? Because the first rule of scandal is cruelly simple. The town does not punish what it knows. It punishes what it can explain. And if the town finds a story that fits, it will cling to it like a prayer. So survival begins with small choices that look harmless to anyone else. A woman changes the way she moves through the street. She stops lingering at doorways. She takes routes that are busier, never empty. She speaks more to older women people who feel safe, people who can later say, I saw her. She was with us. She times her errands carefully, because being seen at the wrong hour can be worse than being unseen. Even her clothes become strategy. Not to seduce, to conceal mood, to conceal fear, to conceal change. Fabric is not just fabric here. It's a public statement. A tighter belt means one thing. A looser dress means another. A cloak pulled forward can look modest or guilty depending on who's watching. And in a medieval town, someone is always watching. But clothing is the easy part. The hard part is the face. Because a secret doesn't live only in the body. It lives in the eyes, those tiny hesitations. The flinch when a name is mentioned. The way a woman laughs a second too late. The scandal often begins because someone senses something, and then goes looking for a reason. So women learn to perform normality. They laugh when they are tired. They eat when they are nauseated. They show up to church when they want to disappear. They force themselves into public spaces because a woman who hides creates an empty space for imagination to fill. And for a while this can work. It's not because the town is merciful, but because the town is busy. People have chores, debts, sickness, winter. They don't want every rumor to become real. Many prefer not to know until they do. That is where alliances enter the story, because no one survives a secret alone. A woman leans on other women first. Sister, a friend. Someone who has her own reasons to hate gossip. Sometimes the alliance is sincere, born of shared fear. Sometimes it's transactional. I'll cover for you if you cover for me. Sometimes it's fragile, built on nothing but hope. Then come the people who can shape the town's belief. The servant who hears the household arguments. The neighbor who controls the shared oven and therefore controls conversation. The midwife who can calm a panic or confirm it. The priest who can soften a husband's rage with holy language or sharpen it with guilt. Each ally is also a hazard, because every person who knows becomes a lever someone else can pull. Coins help. Promises help. Threats help. But the medieval world is full of sharper currencies: shame, revenge, hunger, and the desire to feel powerful for 5 minutes inside a life that offers very little power at all. And here is the most brutal truth. Many women weren't trying to get away with cheating. They were trying to survive a system that would crush them either way. A woman could be trapped in a marriage she never chose. She could be watched, controlled, treated like an air-making machine, punished for refusing, punished for obeying. In that world, a secret lover could feel less like rebellion and more like breath. But the system doesn't care why you breathe. It only cares whether you threaten the contract. So the woman learns to speak carefully, to be seen at the right times, to keep her hands steady even when her mind is screaming. She learns to make her life look ordinary. And still, the most dangerous thing is not the town. It's the one person who lives in the same house. Because a husband doesn't need gossip. He has proximity, sees the moments the town misses. He notices the silence at dinner, notices the way she turns her body away when he comes close. He notices the new caution in her movements. And once he begins counting the months, the performance stops being a shield, becomes a countdown. In medieval life, money is not the only currency. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can possess is a sentence you heard through a door, a glance you witnessed at the market, a name you shouldn't know. Because secrets create power, and power attracts people who are hungry. A woman trying to keep an affair hidden quickly discovers something humiliating. The secret is never fully hers. The moment another human being notices anything, the affair begins to leak into the world like smoke. And smoke, in a crowded town, always finds a way out. At first, the brokers of secrecy look harmless. A servant is the easiest example. She sees laundry. She sees blood on cloth. She sees who comes in after dark, who leaves before dawn, who avoids the front door. She hears arguments that polite society pretends don't exist. And she learns very early that knowledge makes her important, not respected, not protected, but important. And importance in a medieval household can be traded. A loaf of bread every week, a warmer blanket in winter, promise not to be beaten. Sometimes it's that simple. Sometimes it's uglier. A servant who feels humiliated takes revenge in the only way she can, by telling the one story that will ruin the woman above her. Then there are the women who move through town like quiet professionals, midwives. The town treats them like helpers until the moment it needs them as judges. A midwife can confirm a pregnancy, she can deny it. She can advise a family to calm down too early to say or. She can feed suspicion with one carefully chosen look. And that look matters, because midwives sit at the intersection of fear and necessity. They are summoned in panic. They're whispered to in kitchens. They're begged, bribed, threatened. They hear the truth in fragments. A woman's terror, a husband's rage, a mother-in-law's obsession with heirs. They can become protectors, but they can also become gatekeepers who make women pay over and over for silence. Not always in coin, sometimes in favors, in promises, in obedience. A midwife who controls a secret doesn't need to shout. She only needs to remind you that she could. Then come the men who claim moral authority, priests. Confession is supposed to be a door that closes. In practice, it's a door with cracks. A priest may not repeat what he hears openly, but he can shape the world around it. He can preach a sermon about wives who stray and watch who flinches. He can advise a husband to be vigilant without saying why. He can encourage a powerful family to act swiftly for the good of the community. And the worst part is that he can do all of this while looking holy. In a town that fears sin like disease, the priest doesn't just hear secrets. He directs the town's appetite for punishment. There are smaller brokers to people you would never suspect. At an innkeeper who sees who rented a room, a neighbor who controls the shared oven and therefore controls conversation, a friend who knows your schedule a little too well, a woman at the market who smiles too widely when she asks how you're feeling. All of them are connected by one truth. Secrets do not sit still. They circulate. And once a secret circulates, it becomes a commodity. It can be exchanged for protection, for status, for revenge, for the simple pleasure of being the person who knows. In a world where most people have little control over their lives, knowing someone else's weakness feels like ownership. This is why medieval secrecy is exhausting. It isn't a single lie. It's an entire economy you have to keep. Stable an economy made of fragile people with shifting loyalties. So a woman learns to pay. She pays in kindness. She pays in gifts. She pays in promises she can't keep. She pays in fear. And still, one day, she notices something change. A whisper stops when she enters the room. Neighbor's smile becomes sharper. A servant looks at her the way you look at a purse you plan to pick up later. Because somewhere quietly, efficiently, someone has decided the secret is worth more told than kept. It usually begins with something small, not a confession, not a caught kiss. It's just a moment that doesn't fit the life he thinks he owns. A wife who turns her body away when he enters the room, silence at dinner that feels too deliberate, a dress that sits differently on the waist, hand that drifts unconsciously to the belly, then snaps back as if she touched fire. A medieval husband doesn't need to be clever to notice. He only needs to live close. At first, he tells himself a story that protects his pride. She's tired, she's ill, she's moody. But then another story arrives quietly, like a knife sliding onto a table. What if it isn't mine? That question doesn't feel like romance. It feels like theft. So he watches. He begins to count the months in his head like coins. He measures time not by saints' days anymore, but by a private calendar of humiliation. And once he begins counting, he begins collecting. Proof is rarely a single thing. Proof is a pile. He listens to servants the way a magistrate listens to witnesses. He asks questions that sound casual and land like traps. Did she sleep well last night? Has she been eating? Has she been unwell? He seeks allies, not because he trusts them, but because he needs someone to confirm what he already believes. A friend whispers a rumor he heard. A neighbor mentions seeing a man near the house. A priest offers holy language that sounds like guidance and feels like permission. The wife feels his gaze change, not desire, not love. Assessment. And then the outside world begins to enter the house. A priest's visit feels like inspection. A neighbor drops by with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The walls dissolve. And once a private problem becomes public interest, it doesn't return to private again. It only grows. In a medieval town, a rumor doesn't arrive like news. It arrives like smoke. It slips under doors, clings to hair and cloth, settles into taverns and kitchens, and by the time you notice the air has changed, everyone is already breathing the same story. It starts with a detail. Not an accusation yet. A cloak on a warm day. Refusal of wine. A hand on a belly for a heartbeat too long. Talk becomes sharpened. At the market, it moves through pauses. At the oven, it moves through glances. In the tavern, it moves through jokes. Each retelling makes the story less a question and more a shape, until people can see it even without proof. Yesterday, she was just a wife. Today, she is a prediction. Even silence becomes suspicious. If she protests, she's defensive. If she stays calm, she's calculating. If she cries, she's guilty. The town builds a cage where every reaction looks like proof. And once the rumor becomes common property, it becomes useful. Someone uses it to settle a grudge. Someone uses it to win favor by offering information. A secret that once lived inside a house now lives in the mouths of people who have never crossed its threshold. When the husband hears it not as a whisper, but as a certainty, he doesn't feel like he's discovering betrayal. He feels like he's being laughed at. And a town that feeds on stories wants the next step. A witness, a confession, a display. When secrets leak, people don't always run to the law first. They run to the church. The priest is supposed to heal souls. He also administers order. He knows families, grudges, fragile alliances. He maps power. A woman may confess hoping for mercy, privacy, a penance that closes the matter quietly. But confession isn't only spiritual. It's informational. The priest can react. He can guide. He can ask questions that narrow the story, push toward names, toward timelines, toward a narrative. And once a narrative exists, it can be steered. A sermon appears that feels oddly specific. A visit to the husband plants a seed. Be vigilant, be firm, protect your household from disorder. The priest never has to say, your wife cheated. He only needs to make suspicion feel righteous. And then there's penance, private or public. Public penance is spectacle, and spectacle feeds rumor. Everyone can claim they're doing the right thing, while what they're really doing is protecting the structure. So the woman leaves the church feeling lighter for a moment, then sees faces look different. Conversations end abruptly. Kindness becomes thin and observant. Because the church is not merely refuge. It is a switchboard. And once it connects private shame to public consequence, the town begins waiting for the body to confirm what mouths have already decided. For a while, a woman can hide inside ambiguity. Then the body becomes visible. Curve. A belt that won't close. A movement that requires caution. A breath that catches. A dress chosen for thickness. Laugh avoided because it pulls on the abdomen. And the town notices because it wants to be right. Now, the arithmetic becomes public. When did he return? How long was he gone? Details are argued over by people who were never present because details are the currency of certainty. The husband hardens. Questions sharpen. Patience disappears. He watches his wife with accusation, as if accusing can force the world back into order. The network fractures. A friend grows anxious. A servant calculates profit. A midwife decides protection is too costly. The cruelest thing happens. The woman becomes alone in public, not because she is physically alone, but because her category has changed. She is now a warning in progress. Soon, someone demands a formal step, an inquiry, a confession, a witness, a correction. Because medieval society cannot leave a crack unsealed, correction begins, and correction has teeth. Medieval punishment is rarely about morality. It is about stabilizing the machine. A man's infidelity may be condemned, but it does not create an air-shaped question mark in the middle of property. A woman can. So the system turns toward her. The husband becomes the injured party, not because his pain is deeper, but because his humiliation threatens social confidence. If husbands can be made fools, order feels fragile. So the town rallies around him, not out of compassion, out of self-defense. It gives him permission to be harsh. It gives him language, order, respectability, manhood. Even men who cheat become strict, because strictness signals you're not the one being laughed at. The lover often fades into shadow. It's unknown, protected, or inconvenient to identify. The system prefers the simplest target, so the woman becomes the main character of the punishment. Sometimes through courts, often through social force, exclusion, shaming, coldness, that turns daily life into a wall. The husband's honor must be repaired. Repair doesn't mean healing. It means demonstrating control. And women enforce it to neighbors, proving respectability. Mothers-in-law protecting status. Midwives protecting position. Incentive is terrifying. Join the judgment, or risk being suspected of letting disorder spread. That's why the husband survives. The town can lean on him. The woman becomes the crack that must be sealed, covered, or cut out. The medieval world rarely needs a scaffold to destroy a person. Most of the time, it uses something slower. It starts with a door that closes. Greetings. Stop. Credit stops. Space at the oven disappears. At church, bodies shift away. Your name becomes a hint, a joke, a warning. Daily life becomes a corridor of refusals. Then comes public shame. Sometimes official, sometimes coordinated silence. Visibility becomes punishment. The woman's body becomes a message board. Removal follows. Pressure to leave the home, framed as for the good of the household. Then exile, formal or informal. A town cleans itself by pushing rot out of the barrel. The coldest punishment is erasure. Names stop being spoken. Records blur. Child is recorded differently or not at all. A household rewrites its own history, smoothing a stain. A scandal doesn't just hurt, it edits. And the town moves on quickly, because moving on proves the punishment worked, but the story continues anyway. It becomes a warning whispered to girls, a joke told to men, a lesson repeated until it feels like truth. And beneath it is the inconvenience punishment can't erase the child. Town can shame a woman, exile her, erase her name. It cannot erase the future. A pregnancy is a living question. Whose child is it? Not sentimental, legal, economic, brutal, inheritance, status, stability. The child becomes the center of the storm. For the husband, the child threatens his name. For the wife's family, the child threatens marriage prospects. For the town, the child must be sorted into a category: legitimate, illegitimate, inside, outside. Labels follow like shadows. Sometimes families rewrite, adjust timelines, repeat a story until it becomes obvious. The town may accept it because acceptance is convenient, but acceptance is conditional. Conditional acceptance is a prison. The child grows up watched, compared, measured for resemblance. Proof hunted in a jawline, an eye, a temperament. Sometimes the town refuses the child, denies inheritance, guild paths, good marriages, pushes them into margins. Darker cases. The child disappears from the official story. A record never written. A name never entered. A baby passed to another roof, under another narrative. This is erasure again. Not always murder, but disappearance. Disappearance creates ghosts. Ghosts become future conflicts. Claims, blackmail, inheritance disputes, violence. That's why legitimacy terrifies medieval families. It's not only honor, it's stability. A single scandal can echo for generations. Time always carries it forward. It's tempting to imagine this as rare, but the mechanism existed everywhere. Marriage as contract, legitimacy as obsession, church as authority, town as court, and women's bodies as evidence. So it's not one scandal, it's a system. The details shift city, village, noble household, but the logic stays. Cheating is treated as destabilizing because it threatens the chain. Husband, heir, inheritance, order. People don't respond with compassion. They respond like frightened communities do. They search for a body to blame. And women are the easiest bodies to turn into proof. So much of the scandal is not about sex. It's about control over lineage, household, belief, fear. That's why these stories don't end with clarity. Medieval communities often didn't get certainty either. They got a narrative satisfying enough to close the case and restore confidence. And the most dangerous stories are the useful ones. Once you see that, you see the mechanism everywhere. Rumor becomes social law. Concern becomes surveillance. Confession becomes information. The midwife becomes gatekeeper. The husband becomes symbol. The woman becomes warning. Many women were punished not because the town proved anything, but because the town needed to demonstrate power over uncertainty. That's the goal, not justice, certainty. So why do we hear so few of these stories clearly? Because the same system that punished them also controlled what got written down. Writing is not neutral in the Middle Ages. Most people can't write. Records are made by the church, and officials trained to preserve order. And order means controlling memory. Some scandals are useful as warnings. Others are dangerous if they touch the wrong people's status, property, hypocrisy. Names become selective. Names blur. Accusations lose detail. Children are recorded differently. A woman becomes a certain wife. Parish records skip. Notes are not copied. Noters survive as rumor, not ink. And when cases are recorded, they are often moralized. Symbols replace people. Symbols are convenient. They don't demand empathy. Real lives do. So the archives feel cold. It's not because medieval people lacked emotion, but because the people who held the pen had interests. They wrote what the community was allowed to call true, and true was often whatever protected the structure. Warnings travel farther than names. They become sermons, proverbs, instructions, glances. They become invisible rules learned without being taught. That's the haunting part. You can erase a woman from the record and still keep the fear alive. Because fear doesn't need a name. It only needs repetition. Imagine living in a world where your body is never only your body, where it is read like a document, where neighbors interpret it, priests correct it, husbands own the story it tells. That's why these scandals are haunting. Not because of desire, but because of surveillance, slow, ordinary, intimate surveillance, woven into daily life until it feels like nature. The woman is rarely the villain the town wants. She is often trapped in a structure offering few choices and harsh consequences for all of them. Sometimes she cheats out of longing, desperation, rebellion, or simply because she is human and wants to feel wanted in a life that treats her like contract. The system doesn't care why. It cares what her body might produce. So it turns pregnancy into evidence and calls it justice. Turns fear into entertainment and calls it morality. Turns a woman into a warning and calls it protection. And everyone sleeps at night because they tell themselves, "We didn't do this because we wanted to hurt her. We did this because we had to." That sentence is the engine of historic cruelty. It trains. It teaches women to fear being seen, to count months, to measure glances, to manage themselves before anyone else needs to. Centuries pass, streets change, laws change, ink fades. But the impulse to control, judge, and turn private life into public proof doesn't vanish as easily as names do, because the lie was not the most dangerous part. Visibility was. A belly that grew in the wrong season. A calendar that didn't match. A story that couldn't be controlled. And a town that decided someone had to pay so everyone else could feel safe. Centuries passed. The world forgot their names. But it never forgot the lesson carved into silence. In a society built on fear, the body doesn't just live, it testifies. And sometimes that testimony is a sentence. And that's the part that stays with you. Not the scandal itself, but the machinery that turned a private life into public proof. In a world obsessed with order, the body didn't just live. It testified. If you want more long, immersive stories like this, where history feels human, tense, and unsettling hit-like, subscribe and tell me which medieval angle you want next. Courts, monasteries, or city life. And remember, the past isn't always distant. Sometimes it's just wearing different clothes.